Welcome students to Session Zero University. My name is Professor Rainier, one of the many teachers here at the university, but for right now, I am your orientation representative. Here at SCU, you will find a variety of professors well-versed in the realms of tabletop role-playing games, offering you their insight on every facet of TTRPGs. Perhaps you'd like to take a homebrewing class with our potions professor, or join in on a role-playing class put on by our theater department. Be sure to take all your required general education classes like Character Creation 101, Intro to World Building, and NPC Voices for Beginners to help round out your education. There are also plenty of electives and intramural opportunities to add some fun and diversity into your everyday schedule. So get out there and learn. Whether you're hoping to graduate with a degree in DMing or playing It Matters Not, there's always room to grow at Session Zero University.
Welcome, students, to another episode of Session Zero University. Today, I am your professor, Skyler Gorsett, the creator and creative director over at Session Zero Heroes. And today, I'm going to be sharing with you guys a rundown on One-Page TTRPGs, why they exist, why you should try them out, and how to make one. So first of all, what is a one-page TTRPG? So the premise behind it, and I'm going to be referring to them as one-pagers moving forward, so I don't have to say the whole thing every single time. But essentially what you're looking at here is an entire TTRPG system, basically everything a person needs to play or run that TTRPG all within one page. Now, when I say one page, and I'll get more into this later, the size of the page can vary pretty drastically, as well as the fact that you can use either just one side of the page or both sides of the page. Both are typically pretty well accepted, unless you're doing some kind of like a contest or something that specifies otherwise. Usually everybody's fine with the idea of using both sides of the page because it's all one page, right? And in my opinion, why waste the back page? Fill it in. Put stuff on there if someone's printing it anyways. Whatever the case, as far as my experience goes, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of background, we've obviously in Session Zero Heroes done a lot of larger sized RPGs, but we have also, both in the show and out of the show, dabbled in a couple of one-pagers as well. And I myself have actually worked on creating some one-pagers. So the first one-pager that I created was actually this year. It was more a challenge to myself, but it was part of a one-page TTRPG jam on itch.io. And I wanted to see if I could even create one, right? It's one thing to create sort of a big overarching campaign using another RPG system, or even just like a full-sized RPG PDF or whatever the case. You know, creating that is one thing. Obviously, you can kind of like just brain dump and then fill in the little details, and then bada bing, bada boom, you're good to go. One-page TTRPGs are a whole different monster where you have a very limited amount of space and to relay the information for your game onto. And so I wanted to see if I could do that because I notoriously have the problem of overwriting, right? I create too much, I brain dump too much, and then by the time that I'm done, assuming I ever get to that point, I've created, a dozen or so pages and nobody really wants to dive into it because it's just a little bit too much and too complicated. So I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could actually pull off creating one of these one-page, all-encompassed TTRPGs. And I'm really excited because I was able to do that, and it was a lot of fun, and it pushed me to do it again. And now I'm working on like a whole series of one-page TTRPGs. But currently, let's go to what I've actually created and published. So first off, there was Spice Mages, which was for a TTRPG jam that had specific words that you had to sort of base your theme off of. And I believe one of the words was spice, and one of the words was magic. So I took the two together and I created what was called Spice Mages, which is a bit more of a narrative one-page TTRPG. You can play it with players. In theory, you could solo play it, although there's not really a mechanic to like do that. You'd really just be making up a story. It works better as a collaborative storytelling situation. And the basic premise of it was that you are a spice, right? Whatever form that takes, you've got like cinnamon, which is a bark that kind of curls usually. So, you have bark type or a bark tribe rather of spices versus, you could literally just be a jar of sort of a powdered like chili powder or something like that, right? And the thing that made this really unique was in the character creation section of this one-page TTRPG, there's this giant table. It took up most of the page, which was a little bit scary. All the rest of the mechanics pretty much had to go on one page, and then the back page was literally just character creation and almost entirely just this table. And so the table had obviously your column and your rows. So the columns were each different flavor types or smell types or whatever the case for these spices. And that kind of represented your training within magic or kind of your personality that flowed through into your magic. Whereas on the rose side, you have all these different tribes that you come from. And that sort of creates your type of spice, your physical form, you could say. So as I mentioned before, you've got like bark type, which is like cinnamon. You've got leaves, right? Leaves that are turned into spices. You've got bulbs, like garlic or onion even. And all of these different tribes of spices that exist in this world that I sort of allude to, which is referred to as the fridge, right? To kind of keep this cooking theme as part of it. Whatever the case, that was the first one that I created. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't a contest that we submitted this to. It was just more for fun to show that we could do it and to give something to the community. So again, all of these that I'm mentioning here are all available to download over at our itch.io page. Just kind of a soft shout out promo there. If you want to go check them out, you're more than welcome to. And you can kind of see how this stuff kind of came into play as well. So the second one that I did, again, for another RPG Jam, this one was totally open thematically. I think they gave a prompt that you could choose to do, but weren't required to. And so this one was kind of left open. And I have to preface this. I had the idea to create a simple rule system that anyone could obviously pick up pretty quickly and play, which is a lot of the purpose of one-page TTRPGs. And I'll get more into that in a moment. But I wanted to make something that surrounded the theme of you are playing as skeletons who used to be just your generic skeletal army members of like some evil overlord. Well, the overlord has been defeated. And although his magic was what brought you back from the dead as a skeleton in his army or her army or their army, you're now freed from that. You're still alive. The magic that they infused within you is still pulsating and keeping you moving, but you're no longer tethered to that evil overlord's will. And so now you're kind of free to do whatever you want. And I wanted to preface that I actually wrote this entire one-page TTRPG, all the rules, I published it, yada, 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 totally before I realized that somebody before me had actually created what is known as Adventure Skeletons, I believe is what it's called. And it's actually a pretty popular one-pager that's out there already. Now, my mechanics, totally different than theirs, or at least fairly different than theirs. They both center around rolling dice, but mine involves each number on the dice representing a different part of the skeletal body. So 1 is head, 2 is body, 3 is arms and hands, 4 is legs and feet, 5 is sort of their magic, right? It's that thing that stems from the necrotic energy that's keeping them moving, so it allows them to cast spells and things along those lines. And then 6 is wild. And so whenever you would go to do an action in the game, you'll roll 3d6, and you're aiming for whatever body part is related to that. So if you're trying to punch something, right, you're rolling for 3s, which is your arms and hands. And for every 3 or, of course, 6, and 6 is wild, that you get, that's considered a success, and it will go towards whatever number of successes that you need in order to do whatever it is that you were setting out to do. And, of course, if you're shy of that, but you still succeed, you might get a partial success, or you might fail entirely if you get nothing, so on and so forth. If you get more successes than you need, there might be a special benefit that the GM will put together. Whatever the case, meant to be kind of this fun, potentially pretty goofy adventure of skeletons, going out and doing things, doing whatever the adventure kind of entails that the GM put together. And so those were the two main ones. Those are the two that I've created and actually published so far. There's actually another one that I'm currently working on right now that's a whole series. So I don't want to release anything until I have most, if not all of the series that kind of goes along with this One-Page TTRPG completed. So just be aware of that. It's being worked on, and once it releases, you'll be like, oh, this must be what he was talking about. So just I've probably gotten 4, I think, of this series completed, which I'm really excited about. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've actually had a chance at Session Zero Heroes to play test it once so far, and it was a really great time. So I'm excited to be able to throw that your way once it's done. But just a little bit of background on my involvement with One-Page TTRPGs. So with that being said, I want to dive into why. Why have One-Page TTRPGs? Why not go find a larger system that's able to encompass a rule set that's a little bit more dynamic and detailed and broken down in such a way that can really handle large style campaigns? Well, it's for that reason that we have One-Page TTRPGs, in part. We don't always have the time to go learn an entire new RPG or to teach players a larger RPG, right? Obviously, D&D 5th edition has become incredibly popular. If you find people that have delved into TTRPGs pretty much at all, they've probably played it. Most people are familiar with it. There's, Pathfinder's a pretty big one. You got things like Vampire the Masquerade, which is pretty big. But there's still like a ton of other large RPGs out there that are less known. And therefore, when you sit down at a table and you decide, we're kind of tired of the high fantasy D&D or whatever the case, we want something new, but we want something that's not super heavy. We want to be able to just, jump into it really quick and just have a good time. And that's one of the beautiful things about One-Page TTRPGs is that they can really work with that, right? So it's easy to learn. It's easy to just pick up and play it. Honestly, all the One-Page TTRPGs that we've run at Session Zero Heroes, it truly was, hey guys, so-and-so can't make it tonight. We can't record the main campaign. What's something else that we could play that we can throw together really quick or have an adventure for really quick? And it's a One-Page TTRPG every single time because it's just so easy to just jump into it and have an adventure. So if you're looking for that, or if you just need something for a one-shot, maybe you want to intentionally take a break. It's not so much because somebody's missing, and you want something that can last for, 1 to 5 sessions maybe. One-Page TTRPGs are great for that, right? I can create a short story. The mechanics aren't something that are going to last me a super long time necessarily, but we can have fun in the moment and we can create some fun, exciting adventure in the meantime for this one shot. So if you're looking for something to create a one shot with, One-Page TTRPGs are great. They're just great. And the beauty of it too, from a GM perspective, is I don't have to put a huge amount of work into it to play according to the mechanics of whatever RPG that I'm doing, because the mechanics are usually incredibly simple in One-Page TTRPGs. And that's another thing that really they have going for them. So let's talk about, now that we know why we should have One-Page TTRPGs, and let me tell you, there are a ton out there. You go to itch.io and you search for One-Page TTRPGs. You'll find someone like Drive-Through RPG has some on there. You can probably find 101 Discord servers that kind of are centered around one-pagers. Subreddits, of course, you'll find a ton of them there. There's no shortage of them. There's no shortage of concepts that are out there. With that being said, there's also plenty of opportunity to create your own concepts, because with a one-page RPG, you have to get somewhat narrow or broad with kind of a narrow element to it, if that makes any sense. I'll try to explain it. So, for example, you might get super narrow. For example, there is a one-page TTRPG that is titled Cracker Barrel Has Fallen, and it's one that I've been really looking at because I really want to run it for our podcast. And the premise of it is that you are people that are at Waffle House. And in the United States, for those of you that are listening from outside of the United States, or maybe you're in the US and you're not familiar with this, the United States actually uses a sort of emergency determinant system to decide how bad an emergency is based on the status of the Waffle Houses in that area. Waffle House being a sort of diner restaurant. If they are open and fully functioning, then the disaster must not be that bad. But if they're limited on staff and the things that they can cook, obviously you're getting a little bit more into more intense disaster. And if the Waffle Houses are closed, we're in DEFCON red or black or whatever's worse. Things are bad. It's a wild concept to think about for sure. And so the premise of this TTRPG, Cracker Barrel Has Fallen, which is, again, two sides to the paper. The premise behind it is you guys are people that are at Waffle House. Some of you are probably employees. There might be a couple of people that are customers. The players are all just people at this Waffle House. And there's a zombie apocalypse happening. How bad is the zombie apocalypse? Well, that's really determined through the game as you play. That same index that I had talked about before is moving from a green zone, which means things are pretty fine, honestly. It's not that big of a deal, all the way through yellow, which means things are getting pretty bad. The Waffle House is starting to be unable to cook some things. Maybe their menu is shortening or their equipment is going out. And then down to red, where it's like, this is bad. Waffle House is on the brink of closing or is closed, in which case the game is over. And so that's a very narrow scope, right? You have specific things, very specific elements. You have the zombie apocalypse, which kind of focuses the theme. And then you have the specifics of you're all like people at this Waffle House. Specifically, right? There's another RPG, and this one's actually not as narrow. It's a bit more wide, and it's under the premise that you guys are a bunch. Sorry, I say you guys. I'm so used to talking to my players. The players are all a bunch of just generic townsfolk in a fantasy village. They're just farmers, they're local business people, whatever the case. And a monster attacks. Some sort of horror or villain or something along those lines attacks their village, and there are no heroes. They're the only ones that can go out and fight this thing. So that one's got a bit more of a broad, wide premise to it, with a narrow element of you're all these townfolk that have very limited resources for fighting monsters, right? You might go grab your torch and pitchfork, but time and time again, watching some of the movies and shows that we watch, it's usually not as effective as, the hero that comes in with a sword and a shield and he's got some sort of magical blessing given to him by some deity to fight this specific monster, whatever it may be. So it's, again, taking that theme that you want to have and either narrowing it down or making it super broad. And a couple good examples for a very broad theme. There's a very famous one-page TTRPG titled Honey Heist. And you've probably, if you're a fan of like Critical Role, you've probably seen them play it. There's plenty of other actual plays that have done Honey Heist as well. And the premise of Honey Heist is that you're all playing bears, different kinds of bears. There's tables to roll on it, and then you get sort of benefits and things along those lines based on which bear that you have and your personality. And you are bears trying to pull off a heist. So it's a heist game, right? You're going to be robbing somebody of something or breaking into a facility and trying to get some asset or resource. Whatever the case, it's very broad because that's kind of where the theme of it all stops. They're not giving you an end game. They're not even telling you what the heist will be. That's for the GM and for the players to kind of decide. And so that's a very broad concept. You're really just creating a mechanic for the game. You're creating a mechanic for the character creation. And then you're kind of saying, go wild. And for the most part, a lot of these one-page TTRPGs will do that. It's really about how much you want to focus that in on, right? So with the Cracker Barrel Has Fallen, right, it's kind of just keep the restaurant open. I believe it's for like 6 hours is what they specify in the rules, is kind of the goal. And that's like a pre-established goal that you go into it knowing. Now, obviously, the GM can definitely adjust it or change it, whatever the case. But that's kind of the recommendation from the game creators. With Honey Heist, there really is no end goal outside of whatever you as the GM or your players or whatever the case decide. So another good example of that, I actually just ran a game with a one-page titled Goose. And the premise is that the players are all a gaggle of geese, each specializing in something different. So very similar to Honey Heist, where everybody's a different bear that specializes in different things. There's obviously a dice roll system to determine if you succeed or fail at things. And all they say is like your goal is to cause havoc and mayhem amongst the humans. You know, you're aggressive geese. And it kind of has sort of a military vibe to it where like you have guns and stuff. It's pretty wild. But what I'll say is that there really is no end goal outside of whatever, again, the GM and the players decide. So you take your theme, and your theme can have that end goal. You can kind of pre-establish that if it's a very specific RPG, or you can leave it wide and kind of keep things open as far as what the story will be. Now, obviously, some people like to just pick up an RPG and have that goal as a GM and just have that goal already written out so that I can just kind of jump right into the game with my players, and it makes it a lot easier. Some people like to do a little bit more customization and theme planning themselves as the GM, and so they want to pick up something that doesn't have an ending to it. Solo RPGs are going to be really interesting with that, because obviously the GM per se is also the player to an extent, or the page itself has to offer enough to it to create a system where you don't need a GM whatsoever. You just get to be the player. And so that's also kind of a big thing that we can get into as well, is what kind of RPG are you trying to design? Obviously, if it's a group collaborative RPG, we see those the most, right? No different than D&D or Pathfinder or whatever else. You have somebody running the game, but everybody's kind of contributing to the story. Sometimes you might have systems where there is no GM and the players as a whole kind of all contribute to the story, which is that's a very fun way to do it as well. You have solo RPGs, oftentimes kind of a journaling type game. A friend of mine sent me a One-Page TTRPG that sort of made a dungeon as you go, and then within that dungeon you would fight things. And so you'd be rolling to see what the next chunk of the dungeon is, but you'd still have your character who would be battling whatever it is that you ended up rolling. And it was kind of like a fun, it almost felt like a video game, because you're trying to see how far you can go before you inevitably die. And I want to say it was kind of roguelike that you could play again. Maybe I'm making that up. I don't know that for sure. But again, it's kind of this idea that there is no GM, but there's a mechanic set up so that the game itself is generating things for the person to do. And that's kind of really cool and exciting. Kind of going along with that, you've got a lot of map making RPGs out there, which are really neat. You have the dungeon one that I just mentioned. Obviously, there's Cartograph, which has sort of a simplified version of it that you can fit on one page, so you don't have to have the whole booklet. Or maybe I just put that together for something. If you go back and listen to our Session Zero University episode about map making with Chip, he and I actually sat down and played sort of a simplified version of Cartograph. And so there's a lot of other ones out there, these map making ones, that have mechanics built in to help you sort of build a map and tell a story as you do, which is really cool. So all of this, let's take all of this that we've talked about so far. We're talking about theme, right? So you're going to create a theme. And usually this is a place that everybody starts at, right? I want to make a one-page TTRPG that fits a story that I kind of have in my head, but keeps things open so that obviously anyone can tell their own version of the story. And so that's kind of a really great starting point. What's your theme? For me, it was magical spice characters running around a world where everything is sort of like food related. One of my favorite anime to watch is Toriko, so I'm very inspired by that, where everything is just food and everybody's trying to turn things into interesting foods and stuff like that. But there's also kind of a combative adventure mechanic to it as well, so that you can explore the world and fight things. There's maybe like a big overarching enemy that's trying to take over, which in mine was sort of this concept of lacking flavor, this sort of force of nature that just absorbs flavor, takes it away, leaving things bland and gross, and it's trying to take over this world, right? And so that was the theme. With Bones in Human Clothing, the theme is you are a group of skeletons that have been separated from the control of your overlord, and now you have free will. So again, there's an adventuring element to it. You can go out and do whatever you want. One of my favorite things to add into any RPG, one page or larger, regardless, is creating sort of a secret goal for the players or for the player characters. What is that character trying to achieve that maybe they don't want to share with the other players, that might maybe stand in the way of the other players, might be something embarrassing they don't want to share? Whatever the case, it's a secret goal that they don't tell everybody else. It might come up eventually, and it probably should. But the key thing is that nobody knows what each other's secret goals are, and those might step on the toes of the other players. And that creates a little bit of drama. That creates a little bit of tension between the different player characters. And I think that helps to integrate them into the story so that it's not just me, the GM, kind of railroading anything or whatever the case, right? They can kind of help contribute to the story because they have things that they desperately want to seek out before you guys get to the end of the one shot or the end of the campaign, whatever the case. So anyway, all of that kind of goes into theme. And again, theme should be usually pretty easy. I think maybe very rarely do people come up with the mechanic of the game before they come up with a theme. I always find that the mechanic part is actually the bigger challenge. Theme is usually where people start. I have this kind of general idea of a world I want to create, and I want to build a system that fits it. And that's great. That's great. So that's a good place to start. Now, as far as like my style of writing, everybody's style of writing is going to be different. As far as advice goes for writing out the theme and kind of the one-page TTRPG in and of itself, but I'll go theme to kind of help out, is don't worry too much about organization, but just enough to ensure that you don't just vomit onto the page. A lot of people say just vomit onto the page right off the bat. To an extent, yes, but I don't fully disagree with that for this reason. You don't want to get lost in your own you don't want to get lost in your own vomit. This is true. You don't want to get lost in everything that you've just sort of gushed out onto the page. You don't want to lose bits and pieces, because I've definitely had that happen before. Try to keep things organized. Use multiple pages for now. Okay, this isn't where we're stopping out when we first dump everything onto the page. We're going to adjust this. We're going to clean it up. We're going to organize it even better by the end of this. But for the time being, when you first get started, get everything out onto paper, but try to keep it organized into chunks. If you use something like Google Docs is really good for this, where you can have different pages and you can label each one of those pages and have obviously different information on each one. So you might open up a page. When I do like any RPG, I might have one page that's like key NPCs. I'll have a page that's locations. I'll have a page that's just general ideas that I haven't really labeled or decided where they go yet. I'm going to have a section for side quests. I'm going to have a section for the main quest and the plot line and the story and all this other stuff. So feel free to do something along those lines. Use different tabs or different pages or whatever the case, wherever you're formatting all of this on. Unload all of your ideas on there, but do it in a way that you can quickly find and re-reference the information. Because the last thing you want to do is get lost in your own information and then lose motivation and then be done with the project. You also don't want to over-organize, because again, we're going to go back and we're going to do all of this in a nice, clean fashion by the end. But we've got time to get there. So don't over-organize to the point where, again, you lose motivation, you lose steam, and some of those ideas that are already in your head that need to just get spat out onto the page get lost because you're overthinking through some of the details, right? It's best to just get everything out as quickly and efficiently as you can before getting too detail-oriented. So all of that kind of encompasses theme and sort of the starting point of creating this one-page TTRPG. Now we can move into mechanics. Now, this is what I said before was kind of one of the most challenging elements. You might think to yourself, well, easy, I'll just, do something somebody else has done. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to use somebody else's idea of you roll 3d6 and a 5 or a 6 is a success, and then you count the number of successes against however many the GM said that you need, that's a pretty standard system for a one-page TTRPG. It's easy, it's effective, it gets the job done, and there's nothing wrong with that. But one thing that I would encourage you to do is really think through your theme and create mechanics that work nicely with that. There are so many, and I cannot emphasize this, so many incredibly creative ideas that people have come up with for their one-page TTRPGs. I'm sure other RPGs do some unique things as well, but one-page TTRPGs, the sort of ease of write and access and posting of them, have created just an absolute wealth of just really incredible creative ideas out there for how you can create mechanics within your game, how you can determine success or failure as the players are trying to progress, or whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? Character creation, again, jumping back to Spice Mages, because that was probably a more unique one than Bones and Human Clothing, had a whole table. And I'd forgotten to mention this, but once you choose, your flavor profile, and once you choose what tribe that you would come from, the 2 points on this massive table would meet, and it would actually show you, I think, 3 to 4 words that become your magic spells, or become a portion of your magic spells. They're usually descriptive words, or, something that kind of alludes to a concept. You have the freedom to slap another word or two onto it to actually create the full spell, but you might get a word like spicy, and then you could add something to it. So you could say spicy meatball, and a giant hot meatball comes shooting out of your wand, right? And so the mechanic to that was the character creation actually directly goes into your magical casting. And the words that you'll use for that are all words that would fit for a spice that would be typed as, a hot bark type spice mage, right? Spicy comes out of that, and that's one of the words that you get to use. Mechanics can vary pretty massively. Everything from something that's very narrative focused, like Spice Mages was, right? It wasn't any kind of super technical stuff. I cast a spell using these words. It works, right? There's not really a lot to it. It's just how the GM then responds from there. And then you go back and forth as players casting spells and the GM presenting more problems or challenging whatever it is that you just cast in some way, shape, or form to create kind of a fun narrative, collaborative storytelling. On the other hand, you've got a very classic approach, like we mentioned before, with the dice. Now, you might think, okay, well, you did that for Bones and Human Clothing, but I would argue otherwise, right? So each number on the dice represented a part of your body. So it's not so straightforward that 5 and 6 is a success, everything else is a failure. I wanted to give it a little bit more life than that, right? So when I roll to use my eyes to look around and try to perceive if there's an enemy hidden within the darkness, I'm not just rolling for 5s and 6s. I'm rolling for 1s, which represent your head, and I'm rolling for 6s. And then I furthered that mechanic to tie in with the skeletal element by saying when you fail in a situation that would cause you harm or cause you damage, or maybe you're fighting something and you would take damage, whatever the case, when you take this proverbial damage, you take pieces of masking tape and you cover up portions of your dice. And because those portions of your dice represent your body parts, it alludes to the idea that you, as a skeleton, your parts are getting damaged, right? So if I go into combat and I take a swing at some guy and I fail and he comes back at me and he whacks me really good with his warhammer and I take 2 damage, I have to take 2 pieces of masking tape and I have to look at my D6s and decide where I want to put that piece of masking tape. Meaning, if I put one over my number 1 on one dice, that means his hammer probably cracked my skull a bit. And if I put the other piece of masking tape on my 4, as it whacked me over the head, it also came down and crushed one of my feet. And so now my foot is also damaged. I've got broken toe bones. And so I thought that felt really thematic, right? Is parts of my bony body are breaking due to the damage. And therefore, when I roll those later, if the face up value on the dice is covered by masking tape, it doesn't count as anything. So it's not helping me at all. So if I wanted to, in theory, I could cover up, say, both 1s on my dice. And what does that mean? I lost my head. I don't have a head anymore. He whacked me so hard, my head is gone. Who knows where it went? And so the DM might present an opportunity later on for me to either get a new head, or maybe I only cracked it horribly and so it could be re-pieced together, or maybe he whacked it and it sent it flying and I have to go find my head now if I want to get those 1s back on my dice. So kind of opens up it takes that skeletal theme and it opens up some story elements as well. I was very proud of how that turned out. I was very excited with how that turned out. So again, highly recommend going and checking it out because I think it's worth a try. Now, you might have some more variable approaches, something that I've seen here and there, but it's not as common as dice, which I probably would argue are the most common mechanic asset to any RPG, but definitely one-page TTRPGs. So variable mechanics could include things like playing cards, or I've seen tarot cards even, something that makes sense, that it fits with a game. I've even seen people use one of the most famous examples of this would be Jenga Tower in the game Dread, which is like a horror game. And the mechanic worked really well with that because as you're pulling those bricks off of the Jenga tower, your heart rate is going to increase because you're nervous. You're maybe even scared that you might knock over the whole tower and bad things are going to happen. And so you'll have these variable approaches to mechanics like that kind of create, again, it's people thinking to themselves, I want to make something that fits thematically. If you're doing a game that's very mystical, that's maybe uses witches or wizards or something along those lines, tarot cards could be a really cool way to do that. Now, how you do it with tarot cards is going to be tricky because there's so many. With playing cards, you have 4 suits, and you have the numbers and you have the face cards. So there's only so much you really have to plot out for. Tarot cards, there's a lot there. So you might be tempted to go a little bit more narrative with it. Something that leaves it open to the GM interpreting what the card means and how the story progresses from there with the tarot cards. So those kind of embody variable approaches, as I would call them. Something that's just not super traditional, but still kind of logically makes sense as a mechanic. Now, with that being said, you also have the unique approach, the unique mechanics. This is an infinite possibility. Infinite possibility. I have seen one-page TTRPGs that go off of the premise of taking a piece of paper, usually a small piece, and writing a word on it. And as you would take an action that might succeed or fail, right, that would usually prompt you to use whatever the mechanic of the game is to determine if you succeed or fail, you have to tear off a portion of that word. And when you would separate the last chunk into those last 2 pieces so that you only have 1 letter left, your character dies. But usually you get one final action to do something really cool or heroic, right? And so, again, extremely unique, very unexpected, something that's non-traditional from the furthest concept of gaming. And so there's plenty of ways that you could do this. You could have something very nature-oriented, and you start out by bringing flowers to the table for each of your players. And whenever they want to do something in order to achieve it, they would have to pull petals off of the flower based on, however much that the DM requires. So if the GM says, well, if you want to do that, you're going to need to pull 3 petals because that's a pretty big action. So you lose 3 petals, you succeed. You could choose to fail and then not have to pull any petals. And of course, at some point, you're going to hit a point where you don't have any petals left, or you only have 1 petal left. And then, your character's done or just can't do anything. I don't know, whatever. This is just an idea. This is a hypothetical. But again, it's using a non-traditional item to create the mechanic of your game. And you want to do that to ensure that you fit the theme. Dice is not a bad idea. Okay. Dice ensures randomness. Dice, has limitations, which is nice. It's easier to work within those limitations. But what I would caution you to is always think back to your theme. Create the game based off your theme, create the mechanics based off your theme, because that's creating a better experience for everybody. And it's going to really throw the players and even the GM into that story even more intensely, right? They're going to be able to picture it, visualize it, all that good stuff. So, with mechanics, you also have characters. How are the characters being created? I've already kind of gone over how Spice Mages is created, which is a little bit more of an interesting mechanic, versus Bones and Human Clothing, which uses a very standard, tell me about your character, what's their personality, what's their secret goal, yada, yada, yada. It's all narrative focused. And then on the other hand, you're going to have something that's a little bit more stats oriented, right? You're going to have specific stats that are defined, and you as the player will have maybe a pool of a number that represents your pool that you can distribute into those stats. So you want your character to be extra strong, you'll put stats into strength. If you want your character to be extra dexterous, you'll put them into dexterity, so on and so forth. And then those stats will be defined by the theme. So again, if you're kind of doing a sort of simplified D&D high fantasy, you might do strength and dexterity and charisma or whatever. You might do something else entirely that is way out of this world. You might do something that's entirely based on the premise that everybody is playing an alchemist. And so they're not all that interested in doing feats of strength, or they have potions or mechanisms or whatever the case, magical things that will give them strength. So they're not worried about strength and charisma and dexterity and constitution. They're more interested in different elements of intelligence. So you might have a mechanical stat. I'm an alchemist that focuses on creating gizmos and gadgets that can help me in things. You might have something that's more potion oriented. You might have something that's a bit more spell casting oriented. As far as the stats go. And so, of course, players are going to input numbers based on what kind of alchemist or what kind of magic caster that they want to do. And it's going to be specific to whatever they really push those stats with. Character creation can be absolutely massive, just as much as any of the other mechanics, right? How you create your character, what your character represents. Some One-Page TTRPGs really don't even delve into characters, right? A lot of those map-making ones is kind of more, I'm controlling a world, and so it's not one singular character that I'm creating. I'm just sort of a third person, maybe a god of some kind that's sort of overseeing this world and moving things around in order to create stories. So there might not even be a character creation depending on your theme. So think about that when you're going in. Again, it's all based on the theme. It always kind of goes back to that. What's the theme and how do I best create to make somebody really feel like they're within that theme? Next up, we're going to talk about creating the design and layout of the TTRPG. And this is kind of where the more technical aspect comes in. So you've written the premise of the One-Page TTRPG. You've come up with the mechanics. You pretty much have all the details here for the most part. A person could theoretically pick up this set of Word documents that you've written at this point, and they could play the game. But how do you make it look nice? How do you make it look good? And how do you make it look professional? Something that will catch people's eyes and make them want to play your game. So first of all, are you doing this on digital or are you doing it hand-drawn? When Honey Heist came out, it was all handwritten, which is really cool. And it's been digitalized, of course, since, so that everybody can play it. But it was originally, like, you can see it's handwritten, hand-drawn. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you have good handwriting, awesome, go for it. You don't need to have any fancy skills when it comes to drawing. If you look at the artwork for Honey Heist, it's very simple, it's very basic, but it feels right? It feels good for this. And I'll get more into artwork here in a minute. But when we're talking about designing this, obviously you want to keep a few things in mind. First of all is the software that you're going to use when you inevitably digitalize it. Now, of course, if you hand draw it, you're going to want to scan it in, maybe throw it through Photoshop or something like that. But that's pretty straightforward. If you're happy with the way that it looks from a hand-drawn perspective, you're good to go. And you can cut down to talking about publishing or things like that. On the other hand, if you want to do this all digitally, like I typically do, you're going to want to pick a software to work within. It could be anything from one of the Adobe softwares, pretty much whatever you're comfortable with. If you're like me, I love Adobe Illustrator. I do pretty much everything when it comes to designing stuff in Adobe Illustrator because I love it that much. InDesign is also a fantastic software if you want to do sort of page layouts. It's like literally what it's designed for. Photoshop, that can also be an option. If you're a Photoshop whiz, that's probably a good go-to. If you don't have the Adobe softwares, never fear. You can use something like Microsoft Word or something similar. Google Docs, again, is a free option that you could take. You could use Canva if you want to really like design it, make it look super nice. That's the kind of the downside of the word processing softwares like Google Docs or Word is that you're pretty limited on design per se. Yes, you can bring assets in and things like that, but it can be a little bit tricky to navigate through. What is the size that you're going for this one-page TTRPG? Because the word page can envelop a lot of different things. I've seen one-page TTRPGs that are as small as a note card and as big as a tabloid sheet. Tabloid being 11 by 17 in case that term doesn't translate for whatever reason. So you can really delve within anything. There's people that have talked about doing it even smaller than note cards. As far as size goes, you might be kind of pushing it. If it's not something that people can easily print, you're starting to get into a gray area where maybe you should tone back. Maybe you should look more at some more traditional sizes, right? Because people want to be able to access this. You want to be able to share this with the world and see other people play it. If you're making this for yourself, you can do whatever you want, obviously. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is more from the idea of doing it for the world, doing it for anybody that plays TTRPGs that wants to jump into it. So you're going to want to do something that someone can easily print out or copy down or whatever the case. And that's why most of these sizes work. I typically will always do mine on letter-sized paper since it's the most common. That's an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, front and back typically. Again, you're more than welcome to do just front or whatever it is that you want to do. When it comes to a lot of the design elements, there's a lot of sort of key rules that designers will follow, right? One of the big ones is font size. Now, you're limited on space. So that's a big challenge. You don't want to make your fonts too small. If you're going down to like 8-point font or smaller, it's going to be super, super hard to read. And people are not going to like that. If I have to bust out a magnifying glass to see what it is that you said or to sort of get the information off the page, this is going to be a challenge. And people are going to be turned off by that. You're probably safest going maybe 10, 11-point font. If you can fit it, 12-point font, go for it. But obviously you're fitting a lot on the page and that's going to take its toll. One of the big things that I've seen a lot of designers say is remove words or paraphrase things before you start shrinking the font. So if you're getting pretty close to filling up the page, you might want to go back through and maybe cut a few words that are unnecessary, maybe summarize things a little bit more quickly and simply. And that's actually going to help a lot for people to understand it. Remember, we're creating an RPG. We're not creating an actual story here. We're creating a way for people to tell stories. So we don't need to over-explain every single thing, every single detail. They'll figure it out or they'll fill in the blanks a lot of times. Of course, font styles, like the actual style of the font is going to be a big element as well. This is going to tie into your theme. You want something that feels like the theme of your TTRPG so that when people read it, they really kind of can better imagine all of this. With that being said, I do want to emphasize, oftentimes use this font style more for headers and titles and things along those lines. Don't overuse it, especially if it's a difficult to read font style. You don't want to fill out entire paragraph sections of your one-page TTRPG with this style. It'll become difficult to read, and again, it'll turn people off. If I don't know what it says, I'm not going to keep trying to read it, or whatever the case. Use a font that's easy to read for the big chunks of text. Speaking of big chunks of text, avoid those. Avoid too much. Make sure to break things out in some way, shape, or form so that people have room to sort of pause for a moment to rest their eyes on some white space. Separate paragraphs. You can put things into different columns. Whatever it is, don't do just a big block of text. Oftentimes, you don't even want to use sort of like one column. You want to kind of split information up to give people that center point to know that they can kind of rest their eyes. Of course, when it comes to page formatting, make sure you don't forget that printers most of the time will not print to the edge of the page. So you don't want to overdo it with putting your information too close to the edges, because it'll either get cut off, or what the printer will do is shrink the whole page down to fit within the margins, and then your font is super small. So keep that in mind. Usually, softwares like Word or things like that will do that for you. But other softwares that give you more openness with the page, you might have to clarify those margins before you get started. And that's always a good thing to have there before you jump too far. There's other things to keep note of between, CMYK versus RGB and like print versus digital, things along those lines. I'm not going to get too deep into those. Those are something that probably somebody else out there can explain a lot better than I can, as far as how you should design things for those different uses and what resolutions and things along those lines to be keeping in mind. But again, somebody else can probably explain those a lot better than I can. You should usually be pretty fine for the most part. It's one page. It's not the end of the world. Obviously, print things out. Check that they look nice before you, go publishing them wherever it is that you're going to put them, just so that you know that everything looks the way that it's supposed to. One other thing that I will add, and this applies a little bit more to publishing, is are you going to do a color version or a black and white version or both? Personally, I recommend doing both. If I'm somebody that's printing from a printer that I have to pay, like per print, I might be a little bit less inclined to print it if the only version that exists out there is a color version, and that's going to cost me extra. Or maybe I don't have a color printer. I just have a black and white printer, and it's going to look all crazy funky when I try to convert it or let the system convert it, and it's going to come out looking weird. So I highly recommend doing a display version, which is one that a GM could reference or the players could reference on their computer or on their phone. And then there's a print version, more print-friendly version that's in black and white, or maybe you've just cut back a lot of the color, and that allows people to have a little bit more access on printing it as well. So just something that I personally like to do. I'd also like to mention, and this is kind of a side thing as well, is that usually, if you're doing this for a contest, they're going to have specifications on what can be in the one page and shouldn't be in the one page. A lot of times, and if you're not doing this for a contest, then a lot of this doesn't really matter anyways, but a lot of times they expect you to put all of the actual rule set and everything like that on one single page, front and back, as we mentioned before. You can do other things for the one-page TTRPG as like supplemental, as long as they're not immediately required in order for a person to play the game. Then you can have them as separate documents. For example, Bones and Human Clothing, I have created character sheets for. It's actually 3 separate sort of 1/3 page character sheet. So you print out one of these pages, you cut out the 3 things and hand them to each of the players. It has the little diagram to show the different portions of the skeleton and what number on the dice it relates to so that they can quickly reference that. Otherwise, it just has some space on there for details about their character. And those are supplemental. Those are extras. They aren't necessary to play the game. All of this is stuff that a player could easily just jot down on a piece of notebook paper or on their phone or whatever the case to reference. But I like to create sort of these little supplementals that I can upload on the side. So this is just kind of a bonus point, I guess you could say. And that's just kind of a fun thing that you can add. It could be anything, right? For Bones and Human Clothing, another thing that we added, and we didn't do this on any kind of paper, although maybe I should. There's actually a topic at the bottom of the itch.io page that's just a huge list of all the spells. So if you're going to play a magical based skeleton, what are the spells that you're even casting? How do they work? And so we actually created a whole bunch of spells for people to kind of quickly reference if that's the direction they want to go. Is it necessary for the player to play a mage? No, you can make stuff up as you go. And you and your GM are going to work on those rules yourself. But it's not something that's immediately necessary for people to just pick up and play the game. So we didn't add it to the main document. And really, we didn't have any space to add it to the main document, if I'm being honest. Next up, we're going to talk about art, where you can get art, doing your art, whatever the case. Okay. Going back to the point I made earlier about needing space to breathe. Art is a really good way to sort of break up different sections of your one-page TTRPG, or just kind of adding more to that theme, right? Giving a little bit of inspiration here and there with visuals. I highly, highly encourage it. And the beauty of it is, you might be thinking, I'm not an artist. That's okay. You don't have to be an artist. And you certainly don't need to go and get a bunch of AI-generated art at all. There's plenty of stock art out there, non-AI generated, that you can absolutely use free of charge for commercial or non-commercial purposes, and made by, again, real artists that exist out there that have just kind of put these pieces of work out for free use. There are sites like Pixabay or Pexel, I think is another one. There's, any number of sites you can usually find just by searching like royalty-free art or commercial use free art or things along those lines, and you'll find things out there. Of course, highly encourage you to, if you feel any level of confidence within art skills, feel free to draw it yourself. Nobody's looking for anything overly professional. We all recognize One-Page TTRPGs as its own style, and that style really lends itself to indie art or maybe non-professional styles of art. If going back to my example earlier of Honey Heist, we're not talking about these incredibly intricate, highly detailed drawings of bears. These are like someone took a pen and kind of sort of drew out an outline of a bear, filled in a couple of little minor details, and called it good. And they look great. They fit the theme of the TTRPG. They fit the feel of it. So I highly recommend, if you feel confident. I personally don't. I do all my work digitally, and I'm not by any means a character artist or anything like that. But if you do lean into that at all, I highly recommend doing it. Go for it. Have fun with it. Make it yours. You don't need to go grab art from places on the internet. You've got those skills, and don't feel awkward. Don't feel bad about it. Have fun with it and have confidence. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is obviously publishing your one-page TTRPG. Now, again, some people might be listening to this and say, whoa there, Skyler, I don't want to publish. And that's okay. That's totally okay. If you just want to make something for you and your friends, nothing wrong with that at all. I had mentioned earlier the one-page TTRPG Goose that we ran recently with our players over at Session Zero Heroes. It wasn't something we were going to record. It was just kind of a fun thing because one of our players couldn't make it that night. And we wanted to, as kind of a humorous thing, and for those of you that have seen the show Arthur, the animated kids show from PBS, Arthur, there was an episode where in the game, all the kids, Arthur and his friends, play a game called Best of the Nest. And it's sort of this goofy trivia-based game where you play as a different type of goose and you get met with a scenario, and you have to make one of three choices in this sort of survival scenario. So, for example, one of the geese gets to the edge of a heavily flowing river and has to decide, do you want to try to swim through it? Do you want to try to fly over it? Or do you want to do the hokey pokey? And that's a whole joke in and of itself. And the character chooses wrong, and a shark jumps out and eats his goose. And then that's the end of the game for him. And so we wanted to do something inspired by that best of the nest game. And so we actually took Goose, the One-Page TTRPG, and we adjusted a handful of the elements of it. I think we kept the dice rolls mechanic that they had in play, but otherwise we adjusted a lot of the other stuff to fit with Best of the Nest. And it's not anything that we were ever going to publish. We just wanted to have fun that night, so we threw it together, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And so if that's kind of the goal for you, feel free to go for it. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. You and your friends are going to have a great time, and that's what matters at the end of the day. For those that do want to publish their work, for those that want to enter contests or join in with RPG jams and things along those lines, a couple of key things. First of all, obviously self-publishing. If you're somebody that runs an actual play or some kind of like side company or something along those lines that creates things of their own for profit or whatever the case, you might have your own Patreon where you can publish it at. You might publish it through your own website or whatever kind of sort of forum profile it is that you have. Obviously, social media, some of them will support PDF documents and you can publish it through there. But one of the big names in One-Page TTRPG publishing is itch.io, which is a website that sort of centers around indie game creations of different kinds and indie sort of resources, indie created resources. That's where we've published our One-Page TTRPGs. So the aforementioned Spice Mages and Buds of Human Clothing. So if that's something that you want to check out, that's where you can do it at, is itch.io. And again, I highly recommend it. It's super easy. You set up a whole page for it. You can upload the different documents. So you can say, this is the display rule sets for your computer. This is the black and white one if you want to print it out. Here's a character sheet. Here's whatever other supplementals. People can comment if they have questions about your system, or can create entire topics where you have a whole forum based around your One-Page TTRPG to give people an opportunity to chat about what they've done with it, if they've played, how it went, things along those lines, ideas. They can leave ratings. And of course, if it's something that you are interested in, you can obviously sell your content as well, or even just post it as, if anybody out there wants to donate to me, feel free. And then, that's an option that they have. A lot of those same things kind of translate over to DriveThruRPG as well. So it's another place where a lot of people are going for RPGs. You're more than welcome to go to DriveThruRPG and post your one page there as well. And then, of course, there's just forums, right? You got things like Discord, or you got Reddit, or things along those lines, those social media forums where people love to see and share their One-Page TTRPG creations. So, of course, those are options as well. With all of that being said, that's my big, giant overview on why One-Page TTRPGs, how One-Page TTRPGs, right? How to create them, some of the steps that I've taken, some of the methods that I've used, some of the tips that I can offer, and then like where to go with it once you're done, where to publish it, how to use it, things along those lines. So hopefully this was helpful to all of you. Hopefully it gives you some ideas, it gives you some inspiration. And of course, if you've created a One-Page TTRPG, or you found one that you absolutely love and you want everybody to know about it, please let us know in the comments. We want to see what you've come up with. We want to see what you've fallen in love with. And hopefully we can have a chance to play it ourselves. I love One-Page TTRPGs. I think it offers so much opportunity, so much creativity, whether you're creating or playing one that somebody else created. And so I always love to see what people have come up with. And I love to see those crazy mechanics people have come up with as well. That is just always manages to blow my mind, the creativity there. So again, if you have one that you've made or been inspired by, please let us know in the comments which one it is. We'd love to hear about it. And once again, thank you all for coming and learning at Session Zero University. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's class. We hope you gained some new knowledge and ideas from our incredibly knowledgeable professors, which you can take with you to your table and implement into your games and sessions. If you enjoy what we're developing here at Session Zero University, then be sure to check out our lessons in practice by checking out various actual play episodes. We have tested and recorded a variety of games, systems, stories, and themes for your enjoyment, from Dungeons & Dragons to Powered by the Apocalypse to Kids on Bikes and more. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Session Zero Heroes podcast so you don't miss out on any of our future TTRPG content. Our show is available everywhere podcasts can be found, from Spotify to Apple Podcasts to YouTube, so there are plenty of places that you can follow and listen from. We encourage you to check us out on social media as well, whether you're prevalent on Facebook, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Discord. We're there, and we'd love for you to join our community. And if you're willing, we would truly appreciate you dropping a review on whatever platform you're listening to if it allows you to do so. Your feedback means a lot and helps others to discover our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you for your next class at Session Zero University, run by the Session Zero Heroes podcast.